Okay, but I already got it.
Sir, you ready?
Thank you again for coming back to us. We are live back on streaming on internet, and we appreciate you listening. We've had lunch. It is a little after 1, and we are going to finish up our budget. Then we have our special guest here today to discuss the Wayne County Board of Education and schools in our county. We have extensively studied our budget. We appreciate again the staff, all the work, the meetings that we have. Mr. Smith has passed out to us. He's taken his time through the lunch period to, after much discussion, Attachment A, the budget ordinance for 2013-14. And Mr. Smith, because of the change, I'd like you to go back and highlight some of these areas.
Yes, sir.
Save us the time here and making mistakes, and
Okay.
have you to do that for us.
Basically, we have adjusted the rate. We had put in a contingency, Pam, of 650. What was the last amount?
50,000 before today.
Yep. And the adjusted figure today was, I just want to make sure, I just want to give you that number because these were the adjustments. I've got 62709, is that right? I didn't want to quote that because I know you guys verified it, so. Quote Pam Cookie on there. Off the top of my head.
62709.
Pamlico County does have a good education system. So we actually adjusted based on the board's input, a number of items of the last few days of $620,709, and have adjusted the rate as such. And the budget ordinance, which will go in your final printed document or budget, it would set the 13-14 tax rate at 66.65 of $100 of assessed valuation. And then your follow through, all these other items on valuation would stay the same. Going to the second page of the ordinance, you see that New Hope, their rate changes to 6 cents, and I believe it was right at 5.4 or 5.5 was adjusted. Rosewood goes from 4.52, they had one of the lower rates, went to, requested to 5.52. Mr. Chairman, we did, under the third page, do something a little bit different. When we list education, we do list current expense amount of $18.87994 million. We then we list the total current expense at $18.1 million, Edgewood School at $587,000. And then we list WISH, which is an associated education cost. We also list the $110,000 that is done, allocated for the pre-K mobile bus and teachers, $130,000 allocated for project graduation through communities and schools. County also funds 7 resource officers at a cost of $392,236, of which $210,000 is reimbursed from schools through a grant. Additional costs related to school resource officers are budgeted in the Sheriff's Department. 30% of the proceeds of the 1983 sales tax and 60% of the 86 sales tax are set aside in a reserve fund for capital to pay for debt service on existing school construction bonds. A total of $2 million is being appropriated for capital outlay. All capital project invoices shall be submitted to the county finance office for payment. So we included that. It's a little bit different. We included everything related to education this year. No other major changes in the ordinance since the one we handed you last week. The only thing in the we did under, let's see, that would be 1, 2, I guess it would be page 13 in this document, you'll see it. We did add increased dependent coverage premiums by 10% effective July 1st. So that is a change for this coming year. In the, and then everything else is the same. In the fee schedule itself, the only changes, Janice, what page is that on?
Page 13.
13, okay. Page 13 in the fee schedule. It was the food establishment. If you'll look down close to the end, it says late fee for temporary food establishments. Mr. Daugherty may remember that. That was by this, but their schedule is not over here yet, but in order to get that effective by law, we went ahead and put it in our schedule. So that is established. The only other change is the solid waste fee, tipping fee. That is for any person crossing the scales on items to be charged would go from $30 per ton to $31.50 per ton. And those are all of the changes. Everything else is the same.
Mr. Smith, thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
What's the pleasure of the board?
Mr. Chairman. Oh, I'm sorry.
Mr. Pate?
Thank you. We move so quickly sometimes. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion.
Yes, sir, Mr. Pate.
I move to adopt the Wayne County 2013-2014 fiscal year budget with a tax rate of .6665 per $100 valuation and the fire district taxes as we have discussed and approved. This budget includes all the changes that have been approved as modified on June 24 and June 25, 2013.
Motion's been made to accept the budget. Any discussion?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Bell?
Mr. Chairman, board members, the comments that I'm going to make is not for the purpose of debate, because I don't think we should, as commissioners, be debating each other when we have a difference of opinion. I'm going to put my position on the floor, and it's up to each one of the commissioners to make their decision and put their position on the floor. I cannot, in good faith, vote for this particular budget. This is my 13th budget, and I think over the past 10, 12 years, we have done a pretty good job in keeping Wayne County position pretty solid. And some of the cuts that we have made, I think is unnecessary, and in a sense, is unethical, in my opinion. And this is my position, Mr. Daugherty. So this is not the first time somebody had voted against a budget, because I remember some of my fellow commissioners never voted for a budget that we put on the floor. So I'm not trying to copy anybody, and I'm not trying to do like some of my counterparts did last year. But I'm just making a decision based on my knowledge and understanding of the budget process. I do not agree with this budget, so therefore I will vote against it. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Bell. Mr. Cromartie.
My first time being involved in this process, Mr. Chairman. I thought that there would be a public hearing before we were asked to vote on this. I thought there would be a public hearing or public comments time before we were asked to vote on it. Is that not?
You've already had the public hearing.
The public hearing was last week, or?
That was what?
That was the public
That was
hearing.
the public hearing.
The hearing based on the recommended budget.
Based on the recommended budget, but not this final product we've come up with.
The law does not require a substitute.
The law does not require that.
No, sir.
No.
Prior to us doing the vote, I would also like to make a comment that I find it disturbs me that we have made cuts that appear to be for the sake of looking at a line item and deciding that there's some money there, so let's go down to this amount. I've never been involved in a process where it looked like the dollar figure controlled what you were going to do rather than the purpose for which you were going to do it. I find it disturbing that there's no place in this budget for folk to get a cost of living raise. And unless I miss something coming from the school system that was been put in front of us, I don't see anything in theirs for cost of living raise. And that I find disturbing. And I stand to ask this question to the public. Is anybody concerned about that? And if not, why? And if yes, why haven't we heard from someone? You know, I just stand in wonderment. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Cromartie. Any others? Mr. Aycock.
Yes, this is my first budget also. We've had to make some tough decisions. Just hope that we've made the right decisions. But I felt like that it was necessary that we had to adjust some of the figures that we did adjust. And I think everything that we've done was for the betterment of Wayne County. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Aycock.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Daughtery.
I think everyone on this board has got a good heart. And I think everybody has acted ethical in regards to the discussions and the decisions made. I would never question someone's ethics. And I take offense to that. But needless to say, what I see in this budget is a lot of hard effort of going through line item, of trying to find a way to reduce the cost and reduce our budget so that we can reduce our tax rate. Now, we see in the newspaper that that only amounts to $27 a year. That's all it is. Well, let me say, I beg to differ. It's a great deal more than $27 a year. The tax rate affects businesses in our community. And that tax rate has a great deal to do with what the costs are to businesses to bring employment and jobs to our community. That tax rate affects your vehicle taxes, your home, the businesses, not their inventories, but all of their machinery and equipment that they have, along with their vehicles. So it makes a tremendous difference in a business climate that we bring about here in Wayne County to bring jobs here to Wayne County. Tax rates are important. What does this budget represent? First of all, let me say this. Before we see in the newspaper that the sky is falling on Wayne County, this is a little bit over 1% of its total budget. 1%. Now, that's not a dramatic decrease. We just saw our federal government encounter a much, much larger percentage on their budget. So this budget, I think, was fair. It does, in fact, reduce expenses. It does, in fact, bring about, in my estimation, a much better economic climate for Wayne County. I wish we could have found more. And the county manager and I disagree somewhat, because I feel like that the county manager should have been a little bit more aggressive on the front end. But there again, he and I have dialogue, and I think we've come with a fair compromise. What this does is also maintain our current level of employment. There were no positions that were taken, to my knowledge, so all the positions have been protected. It is instilled in our county departments the concept of finding ways to truly find ways to reduce their expenses. And I think that's it kind of brings about a fresh air, so that county departments recognize that we're all in this together, and we've got to find ways to do more with less. I feel very good about the budget. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any other comments? Are there any other comments?
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Mayo?
this is my second budget, and there's a couple things that I've learned. Number one is that in spite of what has been reported in some cases, I think there's 3 or 4 of us that are business people sitting here on this commission board, and in spite of what some reports have said, private business owners have some input as to how county government works. The principles that we use in running a small to medium-sized business or large corporation. A lot of these principles are good for our government. And the people of Wayne County said that in the last election. So when I look at this 1%, I agree with Commissioner Daugherty. When we look at this 1%, what we're sending a message in the fact that we are conservative in what we're spending. We're watching our dollars the same way that business has to do when it comes to Wayne County to survive. That sends a message for economic development. That gives a good feeling to potential businesses that want to move into Wayne County. If we keep our house in order, then we're going to be able to help them keep their house in order when they move to this county. Bottom line is that the purpose of this budget and everything that we're doing, ultimately, our goal is to create jobs and put people back to work. If we can do that over the next 2 to 3 years, when we come back for a budget session in 2 or 3 years, we won't have a lot of these issues that we're looking at right now. Revenue is what generates everything. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any other comments? Thank you, Mr. Mayo. The only comments I have is that in 2012, in November, there was a new board, basically, and in January, when we started to work, Mr. Bell and myself and Mr. Mayo basically were the only 3 that were on top of a budget that was in process since June 30. And as we moved each week, it was evident that it was becoming quite difficult at times to explain the way that monies were spent. And as the county manager and the county finance director was getting information to us, John was having to maybe having some conversation with Joe and Ed. You were not here yet. It was Mr. JDC, and it was I guess it was difficult. And for you fellows here from out of town, we've got 7 that were elected. 4 of us had never laid eyes on a budget from the county. And for all of us to be here today and to have vote on this budget today and to go what we've gone through with all of the work, and I'm talking about hours and hours and hours and hours. And there are those who will say that we have, again, micromanaged and try to get into other people's business. But unless we go, we don't know. And there's a lot of people who've been critical of us who don't know. They think they know, but they don't know. And the reason they don't know is because they don't go. But we have been here over and over and been through this process. And Marcia has been here over almost 30 years, and she told me the other day, she said, you know, I've actually learned some things here in the last 6 months that I really just didn't know. She said, I've been to so many meetings, but there's just things that have come out that have just been enlightening. And that made me feel good. It made me feel like I've been doing my job as chairman with a fire hose instead of a water hose to get all of this to this day, to this point. Whether we vote for it or against it, we've all worked hard. We've all worked hard. All 7 of us have worked hard, and we've put our heart in it. That's my comments, and I appreciate that. All the comments have been made. Motion's on the floor that we approve the 2013-14 budget. All those in favor, raise your right hand.
Mr. Chairman.
1, 2, 3, 4. All those opposed. There's 6 for, 1 against. Mr. Bell. Mr. Kamari.
I was just wondering if there was a time for an amendment to be in motion, amendment opportunity, but if not, that's what I was calling for, an amendment to the
Vote had been called for. Vote had been called for. Now, the vote, the budget has been taking place. Budget's been approved. We still have business on the books as we have put together today. We've asked a special guest to come from out of town in reference to capital improvements. As you know, last year there was some interest in capital improvement and capital improvement plans. Those capital improvement plans have been looked at through facilities, and through the facilities moved over to education and schools. And as we all know, as we go through facilities, the commissioners, we have a plan that we put in place, and the Board of Education has a plan that, of course, they would like to put in place. We would hope this year, with this board, that our objective is to partner, as Mr. Daugherty has said, with the Board of Education and to move forward being able to educate our kids. And with that said, today, this afternoon, we would like to bring sort of a discussion and perhaps a plan that the board could discuss, that we would take it, of course, back to the Board of Education and let them see it, let them discuss it. And at this time, because those have come, there are issues of how we would go about doing these things as far as finance. And we have those finance people here today from the Davenport Company. Mr. Smith has received a letter from the Board of Education, and he has also been in conversation with commissioners in reference to this letter that was passed out. Did you pass this letter out last 2 weeks ago?
Yeah, and I think we handed another one, the May 7th.
Yes.
Yes, and we handed it out again this morning just in case someone didn't have it.
Yeah, these letters have been handed out, and with that, we wanted to go over some of these ideas, Mr. Smith.
Yes, sir.
So at this time, I would like to turn it over to you and let you sort of have our special guest to
Okay.
take us through this process
All right.
and let the people at home watch.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And if I can, Mr. Chairman, just thank the board for the last several months for your attention on the budget, and also as Mr. Daugherty said, sometimes it's a matter of education and compromise and a lot of discussion, and it's always an interesting process, but as always, I appreciate the board working with us and all the staff, and I want to thank all the staff, Mr. Chairman, for the hard work they do.
Thank you, Mr. Smith.
Yes, sir. Moving into capital improvement, as shared with you last week, I gave you the, and they'll refer to these sheets in just a moment, on one being on page 12 in the document coming from Davenport and Associates today. Basically, what is before you are the capital improvement projects as submitted by the school board and as recommended and reviewed by the county facilities committee. We have then taken those and put those in a timeline, applied estimates as best we could, square footage, whatever that is, and then we'll have some discussion about operations as we move through this process today, because that also gives us impact. But we have given this to Davenport, and we asked them to, in a timeline, look at a funding analysis and assumptions based on reserves, based on your ability to pay, debt ratios. And I think all those projects now, without going through those, you have those. So when we get to those pages, we can begin to discuss those. Davenport, I think, will quickly tell you that where you place them in the timeline, how, what you choose as a project is totally the board's call. But once we place them there with a cost, they give us at least their advice on how we may fund them as far as financing, and give us some suggestions in moving forward. And I will also want to thank, Mr. Chairman, folks like Ted and Bob who are here today for helping us over the last several years. They have been a major help to this board and to Pam Holt and myself. It is very reassuring to be able to call folks with this kind of experience. When Q-Scabs came along a couple years ago, we called them, they were in action in 30 seconds, and that means a great deal. So, without putting off any further, I'd like to introduce Bob High and Ted Cole of Davenport and Associates. They are your financial advisors in regards to investments and also funding and borrowing of dollars. So, with that, I would turn it over to Ted and Bob and ask them to step up and talk a little bit about this report.
Okay. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I think everybody's got a copy of the presentation, June 25th. There's page numbers in the lower right corner, and there should be some extras for anybody that needs an extra. As the manager said, we have been working to help develop a plan of finance related to the county's capital program, including schools, other county facilities, a whole host of capital projects. And I'm going to walk through this presentation page by page, beginning on page 2 with some very basic goals and objectives. As a starting point, particularly since there's some new folks on the board that have not seen this presentation before, we typically present similar information on an annual basis. We're going to start with making sure that everybody's got a good understanding for the county's existing debt, all the debt that's in place today. We're going to introduce and discuss a series of key financial ratios to get a better understanding of the county's debt capacity. So debt capacity is a concept that we'll discuss. That is your ability as a county to take on additional debt for capital projects within certain ratios and measurements. We're then going to talk about debt affordability. So it's related to debt capacity, but it's different. How do you pay for it? Where are the revenues or the resources that would be required to repay the debt? So debt capacity and debt affordability, two key concepts that we'll discuss. And as the county manager said, when we talk about capital projects and cash funding projects or debt funding projects, there is another analysis to be done, which is not part of this analysis today, but that is, what are the potential operating impacts associated with some of these capital projects? Whether it's an increase in operating expenses for staffing or utilities, or maybe there's a savings to be recognized in your operating budget from some capital projects. So for the time being, we have not explored the operating costs or savings associated with these projects. We're just focused on capital today. We're going to introduce you to or remind you about some of the financial policies and guidelines that you all have in place. There have been policies that have been adopted in years past that continue to help shape a capital program going forward, and then ultimately leave you with an initial plan of finance based upon a series of assumptions. The capital projects, the amounts, the timing, the interest rate assumptions we make on debt. It's by no means meant to be a finished product. I think it's meant to be a starting point for you all in understanding the decision points that you need to make as you're assessing capital projects and approving capital improvement plans. Start with existing debt on page 4. On the left-hand side, what you'll see is a graph that shows by fiscal year. Everything we look at is on a fiscal year basis, beginning with the current fiscal year, 2012-2013. The dark blue portion of each of the lines represents the annual principal payments that are made. The light blue represents the annual interest payments that are made. Today, in terms of tax-supported debt, the county has just under $26 million of debt outstanding. And that's made up primarily of these qualified school construction bonds and some other smaller installment purchase contracts that have been issued over the years for governmental projects and things of that nature. So we'll call it $26 million in round numbers of debt outstanding today. You can see on the right-hand side, by fiscal year, the annual principal payments, the annual interest payments, and the total payback by year. And on the far right column, there's a heading that says P/O ratio. What that measures, it's called a payout ratio. And what we're measuring there is how much of that $26 million of principal do you repay in the next 10 years? 10 years is sort of the benchmark for looking forward. And what you'll see is if you do no new debt going forward, 10 years from now you will have retired 82.5% of your existing debt outstanding. And you'll see here in a moment that's a very solid ratio. What that says is you are retiring your debt in a rapid fashion. You're not backloading the debt. You're retiring it responsibly and again in a rapid fashion. That allows you to take on additional debt in the future and be able to demonstrate that you are retiring all of your debt in a reasonable pace. You can see it a little bit more clearly on page 5, or in a different format, I should say, on the left-hand side. The county has a policy that in the aggregate, all of your tax-supported debt, we should be able to demonstrate that in the next 10 years, at least 50% of your debt will be retired. You're actually above 80%, so you're well above your policy. Higher is better. Again, it means that you're not backloading the debt. And on the right-hand side, we're showing you the first comparison that we've developed. And what you'll see on the right-hand side is Wayne County in the dark blue, and then the light blue are different categories of ratings. You'll see there are national AAA, national AA, national single A, North Carolina AAA, AA, and single A. These are counties across the country and within North Carolina that are rated in the 3 major categories, AAA, AA, single A, by Moody's Investor Service, which is one of the 3 primary rating agencies. And you can see how you compare to any one of those 6 medians, and you compare quite favorably. You're really right on, maybe slightly above all of the other medians in this category, in this ratio, I should say. The county's credit rating actually has expired. That's not a negative, but when certain bonds that were rated matured, the rating agency that rated the county's debt no longer needed to have the rating outstanding. But when that rating was outstanding, you were a AA credit. And our presumption would be that if we needed to go back and get a rating today, you would still be a AA credit. So as you're looking at these comparisons, the AA line is probably the most relevant for you. Right, not a single A, higher than a single A, but not at that AAA level. So AA, I think, is where you could probably focus on these comparatives and get the most benefit from the data. Any questions on that? Okay.
Mr. Chair. As I recall, I thought we were rated as a AAA, but we're rated as a AA.
You're a AA. There may have been a time in years past where the county issued bonds and used bond insurance to wrap around your issuance, and that may have been a case where you achieved a AAA by virtue of having insurance on your bonds, but the underlying credit of the county itself was a AA, AA2.
And that increased paying 3 years ago?
Oh, yes, we were.
We were.
You were in the single A category, you moved up to the AA category. But again, when certain rated bonds that the county had outstanding matured, the need for the rating goes away. In fact, the rating agency no longer maintains that rating. And I would just emphasize or reiterate, that's not a negative. It goes away just simply because the debt retired.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, page 6, we've got a few more debt ratios to talk about. On the left-hand side of page 6, what we're talking about here is debt per capita. So that $26 million of debt that's outstanding today on a per-person basis, roughly 124,000 population, you're right at about $200 per person. You've got a policy that says that would not exceed $1,000 per person. On the left-hand side, you can see how the population has evolved in the county over the last 5 and 10 years. And for the purpose of our analysis, we've assumed a population growth of 1% per year, just as a starting point. And so at $200 per person debt per capita, a policy of $1,000, you're well below your policy. And on the right-hand side of page 6, you'll see that you compare quite favorably to these rating categories. In this case, lower is generally better. So you can see your dark blue line lines up below most every other line on the chart. What you would take away from this page is that within this ratio, within this policy, you have capacity to take on additional debt if there's a need or a desire to do that. Doesn't necessarily mean it's affordable, but the capacity is there within this ratio to consider taking on additional debt if there's a need or a desire to do that. Okay? Page 7, same setup, except in this page what we're talking about is debt to assessed value. So the amount of debt outstanding, $26 million, as a percent of your tax base, roughly $7.4 billion in tax base, you are at 0.33%, so a third of 1% debt to assessed value. You have a policy in place that says we will not exceed 2%. So here again, you're well below your policy. You could say that within this policy or within this ratio, you have the capacity to take on additional debt and still be within tolerance. And then, like the prior page, you'll see on the left-hand side what the growth rate has been in the tax base over the last 5 and 10 years. We've defaulted, for the time being, to a 2.5% growth rate in tax base. And so that's why, over time, your debt to assessed value ratio comes down. 1, because you're paying down your debt every year, and 2, because we are making an assumption that the tax base grows on an annual basis. And so on the right-hand side, back to the comparisons, you'll see here again, you compare very favorably. Lower, again, here is generally better, and debt to assessed value for the county at 0.33% is below all these other medians, and in some cases significantly below. Okay? Finally, on ratios, we're going to talk about debt service versus expenditure. So what we're talking about here is the amount of debt service you pay every year, principal and interest, as a percent of your budget. You've got a policy that says that will not exceed 12%. You are at about 2.7% today. We're assuming that your budget over time will grow at 1% a year. May not be the case every year, but on average, we felt like that was a decent starting point for the assumption. So on debt service versus expenditures, with an upper limit of 12% by policy, being at just under 3% today, here again, the capacity is there if you want to take on additional debt to do so in a way that would maintain compliance with your policy. On the right-hand side, you'll see that you compare favorably to these other rating categories, particularly the AA2s or the AAs. So across the board, when we talk about your policies and your ratios, you're in a good place today. The capacity is there to be considering additional debt if there's a need to do so. And now we're going to transition to a discussion about the affordability of it. How is it that you work it into your budget? What are the impacts given the resources that you have to dedicate to debt?
Quick question.
Yes, sir.
Just to make sure the 2.7% where we can't exceed 12, but the 2.7% indicates the $25 million in outstanding debt. Could we define the $25.8 million that's in debt? I know that 15 million is school. Is that Q-Scab?
Q-Scabs
That was the 15.
Radio and affordability.
That was the 15. That was the 15 million. Okay, and then there was the radio system.
We refinance on a radio system and board building together.
And we put the board and building with that?
Yes.
Okay.
So you're at about 10 million for those two pieces collectively.
Okay, I just wanted to identify that
Yes, sir.
2.7%. And really, there's just three items that
Correct.
identify that
That's
2.7%. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
All right.
Page 9, just quickly, and I'll really talk about it on the right-hand side of page 9. This is the annual payment that you make by fiscal year for that 26 million of debt outstanding. So you can see that in fiscal 13, the year we're about to end, your payment was 2.7 million. In 14, it drops to 2.65 million, drops again to 2.6. So you can see the decline that we're measuring there on the far right column is identifying with the debt you have on the books today. Payments are being reduced every year, somewhat gradually, but these dollars, the reduction in your payment, become a starting point for the debt affordability for new debt that you might take on in the future. Those are dollars that could be redeployed to help offset additional debt service expenses. If not there, then they're obviously available for other purposes in the budget. But you'll see over the near term, over the next 4 or 5 years, there isn't a major step down in the debt that you have on the books today. It's a more gradual reduction. Okay? Page 10, now we're going to enter the discussion about potential new projects, the capital program, and we needed to start with some basic funding assumptions in terms of revenues and reserves, and we'll start at the very top. The estimate that we're working with right now in terms of the revenue that is generated from 1 penny on the tax rate is right at $742,000. At the time, the FY14 tax rate that we were working off was 67.5 cents. That's been amended, adjusted today based on your action. That really will not change anything you're going to see going forward. It was just a reference point to the proposed tax rate or to the potential tax rate. The fact that you have amended your budget in such a way to reduce the tax rate will not impact the rest of our analysis. The next bullet point says FY14 governmental budget net of transfers, $120 million. And the county has a policy in place that says we will dedicate 12% of our budget to capital and debt service. And on a $120 million budget, that's about $14.4 million that would be dedicated to debt service or to capital. And we've identified two primary sources of funding for that. The first, under current fiscal 14 revenue sources, would be a general fund appropriation. It is current year revenues generated in the general fund of right at $13 million and lottery funds of $1,000,330. Those two numbers sum up to $14.4 million. So that is a key component to the capital program in terms of dollars available to help support debt service and pay-as-you-go for capital. The second item under FY14 revenue sources is restricted sales tax at $3.99 million. That is a component to the budget that has been in place for some number of years that we've looked at. We've worked with staff to determine the best estimate for that going forward. So that is a current FY14 revenue source that would be made available.
Mr. Chairman, we've got a
Yes, sir,
question on
Mr.
that.
Daugherty.
Going back up to the 12% capital and debt service requirement, who established this 12% capital?
That was part of a policy that was established, it was last amended in '06.
In '06?
It's done by the Board of Commissioners.
And that's specifically for capital?
Yes, sir, there's a copy of the policies in that. It's for debt service and capital.
On an annualized basis?
Yes, sir.
Set aside 12%. Is that correct?
Correct. If it's not being used for debt service, anything over the debt service up to 12% would be used for pay-as-you-go capital or set aside for future capital purposes.
Do we use those funds for the senior center?
We used capital reserve that we'd set aside, and that was some of the cash that we'd built in that 12% annually. We were able to use and set aside a capital reserve to do those kind of projects. Same thing with animal control.
Do we have a balance today?
If you go down to one-time revenue sources.
Am I jumping ahead?
On this page 10.
I'm sorry.
That's
Okay.
okay.
No,
It feeds right into
I'll
it.
listen.
We come back.
I'll
Okay.
listen.
These are dollars that have been accumulated by virtue of this policy over the years. County Capital Reserve and Sales Tax Fund of $10.14 million. Public School Capital Projects Fund of $826,000. Together, that's $10.9 million. That has been accumulated over time. That is one-time money, if you will, that you have at your disposal for these purposes. This is separate and distinct and apart from any general fund, unrestricted, uncommitted, unassigned fund balance. It is a separate pot of money than what you would maybe commonly refer to as your general fund balance, if that's a term, Lee, that
Yes.
would be meaningful to the board.
Well, if I could go back to that.
Yes, sir.
I understand the restricted sales tax, that's basically school dollars. Is that correct?
Yes.
I understand the lottery of $1,339,000 on an annualized basis for this we're projected. What I'm not quite understanding, and because those goes to schools, is the a little over 13 million from general fund appropriation on an annualized basis is set aside for capital and debt service, or is that correct?
Correct.
Debt service, yeah.
Well, our debt
Debt
service
service and-
currently,
that includes
capital back was of
2.7 million.
2.7 million, so roughly 10 million is being set aside for capital.
Pay-go capital that you might have in your budget, or used, or set aside for a future use in a subsequent fiscal year.
Okay, thank you.
Do we have a balance on that?
That's the 10.1 at the
In the next group.
bottom of page 10.
Excuse me, I got a problem with that now. because that is actually the funds for the school's sales tax fund. Is that correct? The 10.148? Isn't that the school's?
That is the schools.
That's the schools.
And I'll.
And we'll have to give you the
I've
quote
got
on
some
ours.
data on this
Yeah.
over here. Can help me out there here.
Pam, you're gonna have to come up here so they can hear you. Sorry. They're gonna run one, but I couldn't get it done by today.
Well, I just don't want to confuse the schools with
No,
the
they're
counties.
totally separate. Yeah, no, I appreciate the question. Absolutely.
I think, let me try to explain this. The 12% is an annual amount that we are to appropriate for capital and debt service. And in your budget that you just adopted, you appropriated $8.4 million in debt and capital. Is that the way? Is that what
Yes.
you're wanting to talk?
That's correct.
So, you can go on with that, edit from there. So if that was required in the current budget that was just adopted, you have 8.5 million. Now, it will also include the budget amendments you do next year that haven't happened yet. If you do budget amendments for capital, you would still be meeting this 12%.
Yeah, if you bought a vehicle next
This
year.
is just your original budget for next year.
The 8.4.
The 8.4.
Is the original budget.
That one adopted today includes $8.4 million of capital and debt payments.
Well, excuse me, I'm just really, if you're telling me there's a policy in place since '06 that 12% is to be set aside, $14 million of this coming budget that we just adopted, how are we only allocating 8.4 if we've got a policy of 12%?
We're below
Because-
the policy this year.
We're below the policy.
On original
Well, that's
budget,
fine.
we haven't even gotten to 13, 14 in the actual yet.
Exactly.
You will be due with probably budget amendments that will take you to the 12%.
We think we'll hit it.
You're rather
by
confident
June
of
next
that, aren't you?
History
Based
tells
on
me that
history,
you
we usually
you
get
will.
there.
So again, even though it is a policy, we basically have varied this year from that policy.
In the original budget. But probably the amended, we feel like, and we've talked to Bob and Ted and their other folks, and we think, based on history, you'll probably hit that, because in many years, we were above the 12%. You know, like at the landfill, buying some big, you buy some $1 million piece of equipment, it bumps it up quick.
Well, just looking at that and the way it's being presented is basically we've got a policy in place. We're going to set aside $14 million in a capital improvement is the way it'll look.
But understand
that's
the
not
way,
actually the way it
you're
is.
actually, there's some you might be setting aside, it's kind of like the car payment. When you got a car payment, the car payment goes away, you're still setting that aside, you're saving it. We're spending that money. We're spending for debt service and buying vehicles and buying backhoes as part of that 12%. We're buying items.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
It's not like you're just setting cash aside
But
for
the
the sake
school
of
is not. The school is not, because they don't have any debt. They get their $800,000, $380,000 a month, and it just goes into the account. They're not spending.
Talking about their sales tax?
Yeah.
Yeah, they get that 2 million, yeah, they pull out of that, yeah, they've got their money and they pulled out 2 million this year, we proposed 2 million next year.
But they don't have any debt.
Yeah, we've,
So they can continue to put their sales tax money in their account.
yeah, it's, that
And it
sales
just
tax
sits
is
there.
building.
At
correct.
somewhere around $380,000 a month or something like that.
Close, yep.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm sorry we got off track.
I'm sorry,
That's
now I'm confused.
Oh. Well, it is confusing.
That county
for-
capital reserve sales tax fund, is that just for the schools, or is that money we got set aside for us to spend?
Which one did you say, I'm sorry?
I know the one-time revenue source down there says capital county reserve sales tax fund.
The 10.1 million,
Yeah.
that's the special sales tax for the schools that's
For
set
the
aside.
schools. Okay,
That's specific
okay.
for schools. That's also the
That's
fund
what I
that you.
thought I understood at first.
That's
and
also
then-
the fund that you would hit,
Okay.
if there's school debt, you hit that first.
Okay.
That's where I've
Is that
said,
part of that money we just spoke about?
yeah, if you borrow money for the schools, you would hit that first.
Was that part of the 10 million we just spoke about?
What part of the counties you
It
talking
says
about?
county capital reserve sales tax fund, 10.148
Yes,
million.
that's the school's sales tax.
And it grows if there's no debt. It grows.
It grows.
$360,000 to $380,000
And if
a
they don't,
month.
and if they don't use but a certain apportionment.
It doesn't grow quite that much, because
Yeah.
you've got to take the first 2 million and send it to the capital outlay maintenance.
Yeah.
You know,
I
you
see.
take
We'll
the
draw it
first
down.
2 million and send it to the maintenance capital
That's right.
outlay. Then the remaining amount with no debt is what it grows.
Would
from.
build. Yep.
One final comment, if I can. It would make life a little easier for us novices if you would go ahead and just state that that is school reserved for school. Because the county, on this sales tax fund, the county can't spend that money except for school-related capital improvements. Am I correct?
That's correct.
So it'd be nice if we would
Sure.
label that as
We can
school.
do that.
Okay.
I got it.
Got it.
Thank you.
All right, there's a final item under one-time revenue sources, lottery fund balance as of the end of March at 6.8. That is accumulated lottery funds that are one-time at this point. They'd be added to or deducted from, but that's the current balance. And then finally, you'll see as we go forward, we do anticipate in some of our cases a potential for a 1/4 cent sales tax that would have to be voted. And we've built into the analysis and assumed 2.25 million that would be generated from that 1/4 cent sales tax if it were approved. And we've shown that coming in fiscal 17 and beyond. And we've run our cases with and without that, obviously not knowing whether that will ever come to be.
I've got a question on the lottery fund balance.
Okay.
Okay. The lottery fund balance is broken down, of course, as we know it, in 4 distinct areas. School construction, class size school teachers, which is pre-K, and we're really in 3, more at 4. And that was in 07, 08, 09, and 10, and it was changed in 11. Let's go back and look at Wayne County and look at the lottery proceeds for school construction since 07. I come up with a lot more than $6.8 million in lottery fund balance.
This is the audited figure as of,
It's the one that is posted on the internet.
Yes.
And on the public school site, that is the balance that is showing. It's not.
by the state.
It's not connected to a project at this time.
12, 13. So is truth on the internet from the lottery reports, Wayne County's received $13,469,000, and you're indicating just $6,800,000 here. So if we look at lottery fund balance as of 3/29, how do we go back and find the other part that was spent on school construction?
There, on the public school website, it has, you can go back from numerous years and see the projects. There is a particular page that you can pull up that will actually show the projects that the schools have submitted for the lottery funds.
Okay. When those projects are spent, the lottery funds are spent, do the lottery funds come to you and dispersed to the county, or do they go directly to the finance office of the school system?
They come here. They have to request.
They have to request it, though.
That's right.
Schools have to apply for that to file
See, in
for
this
those
case,
proceeds.
in the current scenario, we're paying debt on the lottery right now with the lottery funds that they request. We're not pulling their balance down. We're only pulling down their request. We're not
We're
pulling,
paying-
not the 6 million. See, we're just only pulling down the 1,000,000, I think it's 71,000.
We're pulling down
The
the
annual,
lot.
the annual debt on the principal debt on the
Q-SCAP.
Q-SCAPs.
Pulling that from current year lottery monies, not pulling down the balance of accumulated lottery.
Yes.
No, well, you're pulling it down from the same pot, because they are actually requesting on an annual basis
That amount.
the principal amount for that year.
Could I
They have
I'm
not,
gonna
they have not
interfere.
dedicated the whole 15 million.
Okay, I'm not going to interfere with the presentation, but I would like to note, if you would please, since the money's come to you, is to go back and do a history of all lottery monies that came to Wayne County and how those lottery funds were used. Thank you. Okay, so go ahead,
Mr.
please.
Chairman, if I could just follow
Mr.
up on that.
Mr. Daugherty.
Because that's interesting, that we are actually not pulling down from the balance. We are actually using funds that are generated on an annual basis to pay down on the loans of the two facilities that were just completed. Is that, am I correct?
Well, I mean, you would actually be pulling from the balance, because, see, you've got a beginning balance, the dollars that they put into the fund for Wayne County during the year.
Right.
So depending on what point they add to our balance, then you're pulling from the balance, because, I mean, it's a continuation, your beginning balance plus what is given to Wayne County Public Schools plus what is pulled down.
But you would see possibly a concern of leaving a large balance, especially with the way the legislature is going around grabbing up money.
Yes, I think Davenport will address that.
Okay, good enough.
And that too, the reason we're asking about the lottery funds right now at this moment is because of how they're being adjusted and how they were adjusted in 2011. And with that report, Ms. Holt, those lottery funds were just school construction. But I would like you to go back and also do a history on the class size, which is determining teachers, the number of teachers that were allocated in pre-K 3, and the dollar amounts for those teachers. And of course, the number of slots that were indicated, and the dollar amount for those slots. And that should give us a lottery history since '07.
But right now, they're showing a running total of right at just over $32 million for lottery use for teacher salaries, 11.9 million for school construction projects in Wayne County, 10.4 million in pre-kindergarten, and then 2.4 million in college scholarships. And then there was one other 387,000 in financial aid, and the teacher amount hit 216 teachers in Wayne County were impacted by that. Also, several years ago, at the request of the board.
Are you doing just Wayne County, year by
No,
year?
just Wayne.
Since '06?
Yeah, since it started, yes, sir. And
I've got the same in front of me.
Okay.
So.
Yeah, that's just from the website. They've got one that's laid out pretty easy. We also had a request when we did the middle schools, Pam, we did, along with the '07 projects, we requested that the schools draw down some of the lottery funds, and if I'm not mistaken, they drew down just above their, I think it was just over 5 or 5.5 million. I could be off a little, but it was over 5 million from the balance of lottery to help pay for those middle school projects. They did draw some of the money down from lottery at that time, at our request.
$2 million.
That was in addition to the 2 million, that's in addition to the 2 million a year in sales tax. They pulled down about $5.5 million in lottery to help with some of the middle school projects, Mount Olive Middle,
Okay.
Greenwood, and
Okay, got it.
and
I'm sorry.
Rockland.
Okay.
Okay.
Now, yeah,
And we're going to revisit these numbers in a different format, so you'll see
Sure.
them again and maybe see how they flow through.
I'm good so far.
We have,
Get you back on track.
the first scenario to discuss on page 11 is, we mentioned here, because it's the only difference between the two scenarios we'll look at, is the estimated project cost for Spring Creek Grant.
Ted, raise your microphone up, please.
For Spring Creek Grantham Schools. So scenario one is assumed that project will be $17.6 million in fiscal 16. And on 12, you can see all the projects together collectively. Each of them is numbered. The top half of the page is the projects themselves. You can see the color-coded boxes represent where the funding is coming from. Green is cash funded, meaning equity, whether it's from current year revenues or accumulated one-time revenues. And then we've color-coded other projects together to coincide with an assumed future borrowing. So this CIP runs from fiscal year 14 out to fiscal year 23. There are $245 million worth of projects identified across 20-some different categories. The bottom half of the page looks at the sources of funding. Lines 29 through 40 are debt funding, and over this CIP, it's about $140 million, $139 million that would be funded through debt. And the bottom portion of that page, we're showing the cash and grant funding sources, which equals about $105 million. So $139 million of debt-funded projects, $105 million of cash-funded projects, for a grand total of approximately $245 million. On a balance, on a percentage basis, just so you know, that's about 57% of the capital program is funded through debt. 43% of the capital projects would be funded through cash, pay-go, grant monies.
Over 10 years.
Over 10 years, yes, sir. And so you can see, again, year by year, project by project, what is anticipated to be funded with cash, what's anticipated to be debt funded. And you can see in the middle part of the page, beginning in fiscal 15 out through fiscal 22, we've made an assumption that there would be 5 different potential bond issues that would sum up to the $139 million. And then at the very bottom, you'll see the amount of annual pay-as-you-go funding that would be made available for this capital program. Okay? And again, I think as the manager said, what this came out of the facilities committee and other, what was provided to y'all by the schools.
It did.
Yep.
That, when we're talking about the capital here, the light green bars at the bottom of both the top of the page and the very bottom, those are talking about your normal appropriation to the schools and the community college for their ongoing annual capital outlay expense. So, and also the county's ongoing capital outlay that's in your operating.
Yeah, lines 21, 22, and 23. Wayne Community College, annual pay-as-you-go, school pay-as-you-go, general government pay-as-you-go. At the top half of the page, there are some other green boxes that represent one-time type capital expenses that are funded with cash, like the Mount Olive Library, the detention center, the EMS satellite facilities, E911 data center, and so on.
Are you later going into some advantages and disadvantages of methods of borrowing?
Yeah, we will definitely touch on that when we look at all of this wrapped up together and sort of what's the debt service versus the equity or the cash balances.
Okay.
On 13, you'll see the borrowing assumptions. We are assuming here that when you do a borrowing, you would be doing fixed rate borrowing on a tax exempt basis. You've probably heard, here and there from time to time, there are initiatives to possibly eliminate the use of tax exempt financing or provide alternative funding mechanisms for local governments. At this point, there doesn't seem to be anything that is, a significant threat to tax-exempt financing here in the near term anyhow. So for the time being, we're making an assumption that you would continue to utilize tax-exempt financing, 20-year term. That's in keeping with local government commission, not policies, but preferences, that you maintain borrowings at or shorter than 20-year term for these types of projects. We're doing the debt over what we call level principal amortization. So every year you pay the same amount of principal, and as a result, every year the amount of interest that you pay for that particular borrowing goes down. It's a very conservative way to amortize your debt, and it is, again, a preference of the Local Government Commission. We've assumed a 5% interest rate. That is above the current market, although the current market has been moving up closer to 5%, but you would today be under 4%. So when we make an assumption of a 5% interest rate, there's some cushion in there. Because again, this is a CIP that will unfold over the next 8 to 10 years. And if you were to fund all of the projects that were identified with debt, again, it was about $139 million of a $245 million program, under 20-year level principal at 5%, you would repay principal and interest equal to about $212 million. And you can see graphically what your new debt profile would look like. At the top, it's principal and interest, so the very gray portion at the bottom represents the debt you've got today, the $26 million, and then we incrementally add on in different colors the fiscal 15 borrowing, 16, 18, 20, and 22, so you can see over time how your debt profile would evolve and build if indeed you pursued this capital program the way it's been laid out. The bottom graph looks at just the principal component of your debt. And what you'll see is that your debt is going up every year, but when we hit 2023, which is the end of this CIP process, your debt then goes down. So what it is doing is, over time, when the next CIP comes before you, we are building in there a decline in your annual debt service, which will help you to afford the next series of projects, because your debt's not flat, it's going down every year, and every little bit of that decline in future years will be helpful for the next round of capital projects. And again, that's something that the Local Government Commission will look at very carefully when you do go before them with your first potential borrowing. The next couple pages, 14 and 15, we just double back and look at these various ratios and policies as if that entire CIP that we've identified was funded and the $139 million of new debt was put in place. We're going back and checking ourselves against these policies and ratios we have. Page 14, while the amount of debt outstanding is clearly going up, you are still able to demonstrate that you would be in compliance as time goes forward with your policy of debt per capita, debt to assessed value. On page 15, you'll see the debt service versus expenditures. And then finally, on the right-hand side of 15, the 10-year payout ratio. So, like we talked about at the beginning of the presentation, with these ratios and with these policies, the capacity is there for the funding this CIP. And now we're going to talk about where are the resources. What resources would be required? Affordability. And page 16 really brings all of this together. And I'm going to work from left to right, and I apologize, I know it's some small print. This case, just note, does not include any assumption about a future quarter-cent sales tax. It's not a part of these assumptions. So on the left-hand side, the first column is column A, and that is the fiscal year that we'll be talking about, 13 through 38. Column B is the debt service that is on the books today. That's that $26 million that you already have committed to, and it shows you what the annual payment is every year. Column C is the debt service associated with the new debt that you would potentially issue. Remember, that was $139 million over the next 8 or 9 years. You can see how that debt service begins in fiscal 15. It steps up, it steps up. It hits a peak out there in fiscal 23, and then it begins to decline again. So that's all the new debt service associated with the capital program. Column D is the annual pay-go for government purposes. Again, that includes sort of your normal governmental pay-go projects that we talked about on that CIP page. You know, that's somewhere in the 1 to 3 million range. And then remember, I mentioned there were a handful of other projects